Hello, Embers, and welcome to another episode of Ember Exchange. We're so excited that you're here with us for our conversations. We've got a couple of different topics. We're going to start off talking about fantasy in media, both in like books and movies, and what place those have in the Christian household, some of our experiences with that. And then we're going to follow it up with a fun conversation about Valentine's Day, which is just around the corner. So we look forward to stoking some conversation. Okay, so topic one today is fantasy and mythology in the Christian household. This topic I think is very interesting, for me anyway, because I grew up in a household where I read a lot, but the amount of fantasy, at least popular fantasy that I was exposed to, was not very much. Certainly not until I got older, high school, college age. And I know that experience is very different for a lot of different people, but the reasons for why that is often have strong roots in an understanding of what is good and right according to what a Christian should be consuming. And that is informed by different convictions that likely your parents had about what media was good and worthwhile to consume versus not. Or if you didn't grow up in a Christian household, maybe these things were not even things that you thought about. And so that's why I think it's interesting to bring this up. We're engaged in a world today where there's all sorts of fun stories and different things you can engage in. And even what we would consider to be classics are still popular. You think like Harry Potter and Star Wars. And I mean, every other day you turn around, there's some new Star Wars something. So the question is, from a Christian perspective, is this something that is good and healthy to engage in? Does it matter if you do or don't? And what does the Bible have to say about that? So to start, I think it would be good if we just kind of share our perspectives, or how did we interact with this growing up. I shared a little bit. I'll share a little more later. But Jill, what was it like for you? What sorts of fantasy literature and or movies and stories did you engage with when you were a kid?
Yeah. So for our family, I mean, there were limitations, I guess, to certain things, but generally speaking, we could consume any relatively popular movie or book growing up. For the most part, I guess being a 30-something, growing up in the 90s, early 2000s, Harry Potter was a big one. And as a pastor's kid, we were allowed to read that. We did read that. My sister and I went to, I for sure was old enough to remember one. I think there might have been more than one. Midnight lineup at Barnes & Noble to go
get the book. I thought you were going to say line up outside the theater.
Oh, no.
To get the book.
To get the book. Back when Barnes & Noble was still, I mean, it is still around, but when Barnes & Noble.
Not like Blockbuster.
No, not like Blockbuster. But my mom drove us in the middle of the night, essentially, to go line up and get our copy.
Okay.
And that was exciting to us. It was fun. And my older sister read both faster, and we also only bought one copy, and we bought the hardcover. I remember it was kind of expensive. So she got to read it first, or maybe we were tag teaming, but she was just ahead of me. And she also gave me some terrible spoilers that I was very upset about.
That's just not fair.
I know. At this point, I don't know if it counts anymore, so sorry, listeners, if it's a spoiler for you, but she would say things like, have you found out that Harry's a wizard? And I was like, I haven't gotten that far. Oh, sorry. Then next one was like, well, I'm done because Dumbledore died. Don't listen
Wow.
to Nick.
Come on.
Yeah, all those
And
poor
then I
people
was like,
who
wait, what?
20 years later are listening to this.
20, I mean, 25 years since the movies. I think it's been about 30 since the books, but yeah. So, no, we were allowed to consume and enjoy that genre.
Mm-hmm.
Did you know that there were people who saw it as, so Harry Potter specifically, I know is one that had a lot of controversy around it.
Right.
And we'll get into some other examples, but that's a decent one to start off with. Did you know that there were other people who were sneaking it under their covers and having to read in the dark? I don't know, maybe that's going to be Heidi's story, not to
Millions of
steal
children.
it. But lots of
I
people
mean,
did
we
that.
were doing that, but only because it was past our bedtime. No, I don't think I even knew that was a thing until I was older.
Okay.
I don't think I was even aware that millions of children were sneaking the books or borrowing their friends or only reading it at school or whatever it was. I don't even know if I was aware that was an alternative. Just thought it was normal.
So was there any prep given to you? Like, now, Jill, you're going to see some themes in here about witches and magic that, we don't think are true or we know to be of the devil or those sorts of things. There was no prep or anything. It was just like, go for it, have fun.
Yeah, I think my prep was let's say I was about 10. I don't remember exactly, but it was the prep of 10 years of a foundation. I didn't need a lecture about it before I started reading the book. It was a faith foundation of, I knew those things were fake. I knew that this book wasn't real. It was just an enjoyable story that I was able to read and enjoy the creativity and fun of these kids that were completely made up.
Yeah.
Okay.
And there wasn't really a second thought to it.
Did your parents read it?
I guess I've never asked. I assume so. My mom, being in the school and being a teacher, I think she read a lot of the things that we read.
Yeah.
Without us ever really even knowing that she had. And when we did end up going and seeing the movies and honestly doing all the things, like we went to Universal and went to Harry Potter and enjoyed all of the things together, all of those things like my parents were a part of. So again, unknown to me, there were kids that weren't allowed to read it, and unknown to me, I think that my parents were screening it, I guess, ahead of time.
Yeah.
I just didn't know.
Interesting. Okay.
That makes sense. So my experience with fantasy growing up, we didn't really have any conversations about it being fantasy necessarily. But one thing that I really appreciated is that we had kind of strict reading time that I really kind of hated as a kid, but now I really appreciate as an adult. Thank you, Father. That my dad would encourage us all to sit down and read for a half an hour before bedtime. And so he would be reading and we would be reading at the same time. So when I started to get into Harry Potter, I noticed that my dad was also reading Harry Potter. It was a fun thing for us to talk about, but now that I'm an adult, I'm realizing that he likely was reading it to screen it. But he read it at the same time, and I knew he was reading it. So, it gave us a common denominator, right? Daughter and father, something exciting to talk about. And if there was anything that he saw that would be inappropriate for me at that age, he likely would have flagged it or at least had that conversation. My dad obviously didn't see anything wrong with it because he enjoyed it along with me. It was completely fine. I personally have no issue with Harry Potter because an adult was reading it along with me.
Yeah.
And it didn't make me feel threatened, like, oh my gosh, my dad's reading this because I am. He just did it. And I think that was a really nice way to approach it because I think oftentimes as Christians we can judge a book by its cover, literally. And just because there's the word witch, wizard, and magic, that it's automatically an evil thing. I think Harry Potter is a nice, imaginative world that gives kids an experience to get out of their heads for a minute and live in Harry Potter land. Now, I don't think that is the way we should approach all fantasy because things like Twilight, I never really got into it. I think I rented it for a week and tried to read a couple chapters. I was like, this is dumb. But my mom didn't like that I even had it, and she said, I don't want you reading this book. I also had no interest in it, so that worked out well for our relationship. And so I know for a fact that if my dad would have read Twilight, that would have been an issue. And so while those two things can seem equally evil by just their cover, one is a cute, very PG story about a witch and a wizard, and there's no inherent evil in it, I don't think. And there's also a legitimate good guy and a legitimate bad guy, which I think is really important for kids to understand, is that there's a good guy and a bad guy, and they are not going to get along, but in the end, the good guy wins and the bad guy dies. There's something like foundational about that in fantasy stories that I think is really important that we've kind of gotten away from in our culture, where it's like there's a good guy and there's a bad guy, but the bad guy's kind of also good, and like the good guy never really wins. There's an issue with that. So I like the older Harry Potter-esque world with that good versus evil. I think that's healthy to an extent. Now, there are, in small portions, giants and werewolves and things like that, but that's not the main focus. It's a part of the world, but they're not the main characters. Whereas in Twilight, the main characters are literally vampires, and so they're making something evil into something good as the main character, if that makes sense. So I think that as Christians, we can use discretion, and the only way to use discretion is to be deeply rooted in the Word and also have an adult read something that's PG-13 and screen it for your kids. Even though it has the word magic in it, it doesn't mean it's automatically evil. And it should be taken for what it is, not for what it could be. Because then I think if we just make blanket statements without actually experiencing the things ourselves, we can rob our kids of a really wonderful experience, and we can make them over spiritualize things, which I think can be dangerous.
Interesting. Mm-hmm. I have a lot of follow-up thoughts there.
Okay.
But before we get too deep into the philosophy,
Yeah.
I'll make some more comments or clarifications, I guess, on how I was raised with this a little bit. So I mentioned that I didn't really engage with a lot of fantasy until I was high school, college. And to be fair to my parents, that wasn't entirely or exclusively, I should say, because they didn't want me reading that stuff. I was a very sensitive child. And so, like, when I was a kid, Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer was just the scariest movie you could watch because the abominable snowman was going to hurt somebody. And, like, we tried to watch Star Wars when I was in middle school, and I was like, nope, Darth Vader chokes a guy out. This isn't cool. Just want to be fair to them. I was a sensitive kid a little bit. But there was also an aspect to it of, fixing your mind on the things above. Be innocent about what is evil. Mm-hmm. And in their estimation, there was nothing redeeming to be gained from a lot of these fantasy stories. Now, that extended as far as to things like Lord of the Rings, I think, which I didn't read that till I was somewhat older. Despite being, that one I think gets a pass a lot of times in Christian circles. The Lord of the Rings is something that a lot of people engage in, and knowing about J.R.R. Tolkien and his faith and those things, I think, help with that and being able to pull the allegorical elements out of it. But pretty much I think the only, at least top line, everyone knows fantasy that we engaged with was the Chronicles of Narnia by C.S. Lewis, which is the quintessential Christian fantasy, if you want to put it that way. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, that was my background on it. I did eventually, when I got older and could go to the library myself in high school and college and check out the books that I wanted to read, I did read Harry Potter, and, it was fine. It was a little bit weird because I was also a decade older than all the kids who had read it when they originally read it. So, but it got more mature, right? More mature themes as you went along.
Yeah.
Now, I really enjoy fantasy. I find it intriguing on a number of levels. I love a good story. Mm-hmm. I enjoy playing Dungeons and Dragons, which is a whole other aspect of fantasy that had people all up in a tizzy back in the, when it came out in the 70s, 80s.
Yeah.
So I love doing that. I love the arc of telling a story and exploring worlds that don't exist in a fantasy setting. Mm-hmm. But I also appreciate them for the way that they create a space to explore philosophical or theological or cosmological ideas in a way that you can't in something that it necessarily is grounded in reality. Mm-hmm. So I find them interesting and valuable in that sense. It seems that in your philosophical analysis, you were thinking about this more as a parent for kids. And I think that's an important distinction to make, there's fantasy that is appropriate for adults to engage in for the purpose of understanding deeper truths or thinking about complex issues in an interesting way that may not be appropriate to hand to a 12-year-old. And so knowing where that distinction is perhaps a bit of the challenge and where a lot of the contention lies.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, so often I think that these fantasy worlds, there's usually romance because every good story has romance.
Debatable.
Oh, I shouldn't say every, most, many. Oftentimes there is a good romance involved with the fantasy. And a lot of times that can turn sexual in nature. And I think it's interesting just to think about like what is appropriate for kids versus what's appropriate for Christian adults, because I think they should be pretty similar in the sense that like I know that erotica can be definitely a gateway to pornographic thoughts and feelings, especially for women. And so when you just put it in the guise of, oh, this is a good fantasy book, it can kind of make that seem like it's okay, and it's not. And so, yes, there certainly is a level of like maturity in reading, right? Where you wouldn't give a 12-year-old an adult book, but there's also a level of maturity in your Christian faith to be like, if I wouldn't let a 12-year-old read this, why should I be reading it as an adult?
Maybe I should clarify when I say something that's appropriate for adults. I don't intend that to necessarily mean explicit content. Because I think that there's should generally be consensus that engaging in things that are indecent or reading about things that are indecent is something that children or adults should avoid.
Mm-hmm.
I was thinking more in the space of when is it appropriate to engage with the idea that, so you mentioned good guys and bad guys, and there's a very clear good guy and a very clear bad guy.
Mm-hmm.
Not technically fantasy, I guess, but we're going to lump it into the conversation anyway. I really like Batman as a character because he is complex. He's the good guy by all accounts, but he has a dark side to him. He's got questionable motives sometimes that he wrestles with, and that's a very interesting thing to look at. And then not only that, but the people that are the bad guys in those stories often are also very complex and have complex motivations. And so having this fictional story be a space where you can explore those ideas, where maybe the good and the bad are not quite as clear cut, I think is interesting to engage in. But you may be right, that's not something you'd hand to an 8-year-old who's going to get weird ideas about what being a good guy or a bad guy means. Does that help clarify maybe, or maybe put another twist on that? The idea of spiritual forces. So the idea that there are demons and witchcraft is a very real thing, right?
Yes, it is.
To say that there's a story that has a witch and a wizard in it and it's all lighthearted fun. Yes, but also there are people who call on the powers of darkness to perform supernatural evil things.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that's something that you can explore potentially in an adult context or an adult story and wrestle with those very real and scary topics in a mature way, but you wouldn't hand that to a kid.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense.
So based on what I'm hearing from both of you, the counter argument that I guess I would give then is, in light of our Christian faith, how can we read or consume any media that's fiction?
Elaborate.
Because fiction is trying to bring us into another world, thematically, symbolically, however it goes. So that can be in the genre of romance.
Mm-hmm.
Well, based on, I can't say I've read any, maybe I have. Haven't read like any like true romance novels, but there are 12 rom-coms that I've watched.
Okay.
Always knowing that with the light of, these are setting up some really unrealistic expectations, period.
And
but it's fun, and it can be lighthearted, and oftentimes rom-com, it's comedy, you have a laugh.
Right.
Most action movies that I've ever watched, Mission Impossibles, James Bond, super cool, super fun. a lot of the stuff they do in that is not real. There's not going to be a man hanging outside of a plane just flying into the atmosphere. And there's not going to be 17 mask changes because they can duplicate a face. The idea that like it lets our imagination go and they are stories. So in the, well, fantasy is the bad guy, or yes, werewolves, vampires, witches, wizards, all things that could be and are, to an extent, real in the world that we live in, but they've created this contained world over here that is fiction and fantasy to safely put them in. Wouldn't that be the place that we would want to consume that media versus not?
I think Heidi said it pretty well, and maybe I'll rephrase it slightly. The idea is that in these, yes, you're creating a space where presumably these ideas could be explored safely at the risk of making you mentally complacent with them, right? So you have something that is very real and evil, witchcraft, but you put it in a space where it's fun and, oh, who cares? It's just kids. And then now when you give that to your kid, and then now when they encounter witchcraft in the real world, their image of what it is this is fun and cute, and I pretended to be a witch when I was a little girl and I was of Gryffindor house, when that's not at all what it is in real life. So you've now desensitized what is something that is actually very real and scary and evil.
So I don't disagree with how Heidi's framing that. What I'm saying is then fiction does that across all genres to an extent.
So if I'm understanding you correctly, it sounds like you're asking what's different about fantasy in this? Why is not all fiction then in this category of things where we're taking something that's real and distorting it? And then if we're distorting reality, is that something that Christians should be engaging with?
Right.
The distinction I would make is that there's a difference between exploring new ideas or extra reality ideas and taking things that are real and evil and making them not in the story. So again, I think your point of the good guys are good guys, the bad guys are bad guys, and there's that clear distinction is important. And we see that a lot in a lot of, I think, the literature that is widely accepted by the Christian community. So C.S. Lewis, the good guys are good guys. Aslan is, I mean, these are easy because it's a straight parallels.
That's literally just an allegory, though. So
Not-
I don't
not
even
always
know
the
if
case,
that's
though.
that's not even really a like fair use of fantasy. He intended it to be.
Is Lord of the Rings an
No.
allegory?
He said it was not. The author said it was not. Therefore, it's not.
Yes.
Okay. But we still have very clear depiction of the good guys are good guys. They're complex. They have selfish motivations. They're not perfect, right? They make mistakes. Frodo is a flawed character. He's supposed to, it's not an allegory, but he does represent us in a lot of ways, right?
Yeah.
Gandalf is kind of Jesus, and so is Aragorn, right? Again, it's not a one-to-one allegory is maybe the way to say it. There's a lot of themes, though, that make an appearance. But the good guys are good guys, and the bad guys are bad guys, and that's clear.
But then you could do the same. Then I could do the same thing for Harry Potter.
Okay, so
What you
so
just
do
did.
so do the same thing for Harry Potter.
Okay, so Harry Potter is Jesus. He literally comes back from the dead.
Oh, yeah, for sure. There's definitely parallels there.
But that's only because we're trying to find those things. It's like Google. You can have Google tell you anything you want to tell you if you're looking for it.
But why are those themes there, do you think?
Because good should overcome evil.
Yes. And why does that show up so commonly in literature? Even from people who aren't Christians, because I don't think J.K. Rowling is a Christian. Why
Right,
does that
she's
show
not.
up?
Because as humans, we want to believe that the good overcomes the bad. It's in our nature to understand that I think if we understand in our spirits and in our souls that there's a bigger battle going on, and that's between good and evil. Our conscience gives us that, and our conscience is from the Lord.
Yeah.
I get what you're saying, Jill, that like fantasy in general can be extrapolated into anything that's not reality, right? And so when we read about these fantasy, like romantic novels, or we see something like Batman, where someone's like falling from the sky and lives, like all of that is not technically reality, but it's not inherently evil. So there is room for conviction when it comes to fantasy, because fantasy is an imagined world. And imagination is good. It's a gift from the Lord. I think we are supposed to use it. And we are allowed to escape into these quote unquote alternate realities through reading and through our vision. So it takes discernment, like Dylan said earlier, and wisdom to know what is okay and what is not okay. The Lord has trained us through the Holy Spirit and through our relationship with Him to be able to discern these things. So I really do think that like one household can say Harry Potter is not allowed here, and another household could say we're totally cool with our kids reading Harry Potter. Both can be equally great Christians and it'd be okay. There are some hard lines though, like I would say personally that Twilight would be a hard line because there's pure evil thing becoming main character, being posed as good.
It's not going to be surprising to you guys because you know me, but maybe based on the arguments I was just making, I actually think Harry Potter is totally fine. I would let my kids read Harry Potter. Goodness, compared to some of the things that are coming out these days, it's downright redemptive, right?
Literally.
It's really good. The interesting piece is being able to extract out those what we would consider to be biblical, but others that maybe we just say are right and good principles from it. And that's one of the things that we're really good at as humans is ingesting story and extracting meaning from it. Mm-hmm. And so, yes, taking something that is evil and trying to say it's good, that's kind of a deception. Taking a story in which, you know, maybe you do say that it's for older kids, but a story where there are clear good guys and bad guys, even if magic is handled a little bit questionably based on some people's definitions, but extract the meaning from that, which I think is very positive, that can be a good thing. And so there are things that are, we would say, are hard nose. There are things that we would say are definitely good and valuable. And then there's stuff in the middle, and that is, I think, where it's a conviction thing.
Mm-hmm. I also think that this is something that a Christian can continually work through, and even non-Christians too, just in your general like understanding of the world and what you do believe or what you don't believe. And that is understanding that when we go too far one way or the other, that it's likely the easiest path. It's really easy to say there's no fantasy and no mythology and no magic in this household. Boom, you're done. That's a clear-cut, easy line for parents to make for kids and for people to make for themselves. And it's also easy just to be like, it's a free-for-all. Read whatever you want. Who cares? The growth comes in the potential reading of the book and discerning if this is good or bad for you, and good or bad for your kids. And so that is going to be more difficult, and the decisions might change over time. And I think that's okay. The Lord knows. He gives us room to grow, unless He cuts your life short. You don't need to put that in there, but
It gives you room to grow unless you're dead.
Unless you die. So which is why we always need to be
okay.
So landing somewhere in the middle on this is okay in my personal opinion.
Yeah.
Read what you want, don't read what you don't want, but sometimes you're going to have to pick up some books and have the strength to put them down. And start some movies and have the strength to hit pause and be like, you know what? This actually isn't good for our home. We thought it was fine. Now it's not. Yeah. And that's healthy and actually strengthening your faith rather than, I think it's much better than just cutting things out just for the sake of cutting things out.
And parents, be very engaged in that. This isn't a space where you can just let your kid figure it out because they don't know.
Right.
I didn't know as a kid. And so, yeah, would I have been fine reading Harry Potter when I was 8 and along with everyone else? Maybe.
Right.
But I don't think I'm worse off for not having done it
Right. So it's okay to set those boundaries for kids, but it also might be even more engaging for a parent and a child to have a conversation about, well, is magic okay?
Mm-hmm.
What is true magic? Are Harry and Ginny falling in love? What is love?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so all of these things are good conversations to have that aren't there if we just set hard and fast rules.
Yeah. There's some actual scripture. Interestingly enough, the Bible is pretty cool in that it talks about a lot of these things.
It really is.
So I have a few places I'd like us to go kind of in conclusion on this. It's unfair because we have read these Bible verses before, so I think that was probably informing some of our thoughts that we were forming. But let's go straight to the source. So the first place I'd like to go is in 1 Timothy 4, verse 7. He says, "Have nothing to do with godless myths and old wives' tales. Rather, train yourself to be godly." And so I think that really highlights a point that we kind of stumbled upon a little bit, is this idea of a godless myth, right? So if we substitute in the word fantasy and myth, this idea of a story, fictional or not, but intended to communicate meaning, is there a distinction in some of these stories where the myths would be godly myths, where they're intended to communicate truths about the world that God created, or godless myths where it's trying to deceive? And finding that distinction and understanding that. And maybe there are some that are a little bit of both, right? We'd say, like Harry Potter, there are some very good principles, I think, that are baked in there, but there could be some challenging ones or some questionable ones as well. As having the discernment to pick those apart means that you might still be able to read it as a godly myth and extract useful, positive meaning from it.
Mm-hmm. So no matter what you're doing, you're likely thinking, because alive human beings think. And all you humans who think, the Bible does tell us what to think about.
Uh-huh.
And so when you're using your discernment, thinking about these things, thinking about the books and the media that you're taking in, we can ask ourselves a question: does this align with what we want to be thinking about as Christians? Mm-hmm. And Philippians 4, verse 8 says, "Finally, brothers, whatever is true, whatever is honorable, whatever is just, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is commendable, if there is any excellence, if there is anything worthy of praise, think about these things." Mm-hmm. So that's a really great way to literally approach life, but also just like, it's a good way for us to even interact with unbelievers, because if the unbelievers love Harry Potter or Star Wars or Lord of the Rings or whatever it is, instead of jumping down their throats and being like, well, that's evil, whether you're talking to an unbeliever or a Christian with a different perspective, we can try to see the potential good in that thing and try to highlight that and even connect with people that we don't agree with. There likely is something true or honorable or good in that person. So trying to see that in the person rather than judging them for what they think or don't think.
Could we almost say that our conclusion is very similar to episode 3 when we discussed our approach to alcohol, in which, as a Christian, we have to come to some convictions on our own.
Yeah.
And those convictions may look different for everybody. That also means that we do live in this world where there are unbelievers out there, and they may consume some of these things, alcohol, fantasy, whatever it is, and even if it is not your favorite thing, or maybe it is something that you enjoy, those can really be used for good in a sense of they are stepping stones and connection points for building relationships that could lead to or plant other seeds.
Mm-hmm.
I agree with that. I want to make it clear for the Embers, not everything is gray, though, for us, right? There are certain things that are black and white. Mm-hmm. There are certain spaces where conviction applies, that some may be convicted where others are not. And then there are things that are just inherently, we don't interact with that.
Right.
And I think a warning to that effect, if we look back into Scripture here in 2 Corinthians chapter 11, I'll read verses 13 and 14. "For such people," these people being those who are wanting to be considered equal with the apostles, For such people are false apostles, deceit workers, masquerading as apostles of Christ, and no wonder, for Satan himself masquerades as an angel of light. So that's talking specifically about false teaching. But what better way to deceive people with false teaching than to smuggle it in to something fun and entertaining? So that's just to say that there are certain things where we would say, no, that's not a good thing for a Christian to consume, or at the very least be very discerning, because you don't know necessarily going into it what sorts of devilish deceptions may be hiding within. So.
Yep.
Yeah. And all the respect to people who say, like, we're not doing that in this
Yeah.
household.
Yeah, be innocent about what is evil.
Right.
Wise about what is good.
Cool.
So my wrapping thought on this is, I love fantasy. I love understanding myth and extracting meaning from stories. This is a good reminder to me that not all stories are godful or godly. Maybe that's the word. But there are godless myths out there, and I'm to have nothing to do with them, even if they're fun and interesting and they stimulate the creative aspect of my brain. I'm not striving towards god myths or godly myths, then that's not something that's worth my time. Guys, we finally named this segment. So for those of you who have been listening along, and I think we've called it interlude and tasting whiskey with the embers. The thing is, look, we don't have whiskey again today, and some people are going to be disappointed by that because it was really funny when you guys were gagging on whiskey. We will get back to whiskey, I promise. We, however, thought that it might be fun to have something a little bit more on theme. We've just been talking about fantasy. And when I think about fantasy beverages, one that comes to mind that isn't butterbeer, because that's hard to come by, and we didn't want to make this entirely Harry Potter. One that comes to mind is mead, right? You read about it, you think Vikings, you think medieval times, mead. So turns out you can actually buy this stuff at the store. And so I found this one. They had a number of different varieties. This particular one that we have here is by a company called Dansk Mjød. And I did look up how to pronounce that. It's spelled MJO with like a slash through it, D, and it's pronounced Mjød. and it just means it just means mead. Dansk Mjød. And the flavor that we have today is the Vikingernes Mjød.
Say that 10 times fast.
I really hope we don't. No, I would love it if some Norwegians listened. I'm very sorry if you do know how to speak Norwegian or Danish or whatever, and I just totally butchered that. That's my best shot. Anyway, I tried to pick a flavor that was relatively close to just like straight mead that you can get, because there's a lot of different ones that are flavored or they have different herbs that are added. Herbs. Yeah. All sorts of different ones. This one doesn't have any herbs, but I'll give you a little bit of what is mead as Jill is opening up this bottle here, because I've heard a lot about it, but I guess I didn't really know exactly what it was. On the website for Dansk Mjød, it claims that mead is one of the oldest alcoholic beverages. And I was like, that's interesting. Then they said that the earliest documented recipe was 1555. And then I thought, oh, well, Jesus turned water into wine about 1500 years before that. So I don't know that I think it's actually the oldest alcoholic beverage, but that's what they said. In its most basic form, mead contains just two ingredients, honey and water.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, so it's very simple. There have been a variety of different recipes throughout history. The earliest written recipe was a Swedish archbishop named Olaus Magnus, and his recipe was water, honey, and then he also added hops and brewer's yeast. So the one that we have today is pretty close to that. It's got honey, hops, water, and some spices. They did not specify which spices they are. So yeah, that's what we're going to be sampling today, is some Viking mead or some such thing. Actually, the description that they had on the website said that this was a more original blend or a more original recipe than even what the Vikings might have had. They had additional additives that they would have put in it. So this is even prior to that. So
Okay, let's
Heidi,
do it.
Heidi's like, let's do
Yeah,
it.
it's honey.
All right.
From the
So, yeah,
Lord.
take
Honey
a
wine
smell.
with hops.
Okay.
Cheers, everybody.
Cheers.
Oh, that's not weird.
It's so good.
Heidi really likes it. Jill is confused. I have had mead before, so I kind of knew what to expect.
Wait,
I like.
I'm going to steal this bottle.
Okay. It's actually also, it's not that expensive compared to a lot of the whiskeys we've tasted. It's pretty cheap.
This is my new very favorite kind of alcohol.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay. So the flavors, while you're sipping it and enjoying that, supposedly this one has a complex flavor reminiscent of white port, which is like a white wine, I think. It's lightly spiced, aromatic, and sweet.
Port. I've had port before.
You've had port.
It is
okay?
very similar to this. I
Okay.
also really enjoy that.
Jill's not a fan.
Really?
No,
Oh, why?
not sure.
Okay.
I'm trying to figure it out.
This one is very nice. I haven't had this particular variant on it. I like this one a lot.
You're not coughing.
No, but
You don't like it though. For what reason? Is it bitter? Is it
Too sweet?
too sweet? Because it is pretty sweet. I will say that. So I enjoy whiskey, which I've got my whiskey here because it isn't sweet. Wow. Too much.
It doesn't have that alcohol burn.
No. I will.
This would be dangerous.
I will warn you. It is 19% alcohol. So
Okay,
that's
I should
higher.
put this down.
I mean, we just had a taste. It's higher than your average like wine.
Wait, this would be
But
so
you don't
good
taste
with
that.
dessert.
it just
Yeah.
like sticks to the glass.
Ooh, good note. Yeah, if you swirl it, you can see the legs. So it's very high in sugar.
That's
Natural sugar, of course. So it's honey.
Oh my gosh, and honey is so pure and beautiful.
So
From the bees.
I do like honey.
Bees.
It's like honey and wine. I don't like wine.
Okay. But you're not gagging, so that's
Right, because
that's
it doesn't
generally
have that
positive.
alcohol burn.
Yeah. No, it's very
Okay.
nice.
So we are drinking mead. We are not drinking butterbeer.
That is correct.
But this is kind of actually what I envision butterbeer to taste like.
Oh, really?
It's sweet.
Okay.
It's buttery. It's brown and gold and beautiful. So I think that we should cheers to that. And I would love to know your Hogwarts house.
Ah, okay. I'm sure that there are at least a few members who like Harry Potter and would be interested to know that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Probably.
Jill, why don't you go first? What is your Hogwarts house and why? Does it make sense for you, do you think?
Gryffindor.
Clearly.
Yeah, that checks out.
Yeah, it does totally check out. Why?
Because she's brave and
Bold
fearless.
and yeah.
Jill is a Gryffindor. That does totally track for Jill in real life.
How about you, Heidi?
I am a Hufflepuff.
Uh-huh.
Checks out.
I think that does check out because I would not describe myself as bold. I like to think of myself as not super dark and evil.
Now, okay.
Cunning.
Slytherin
Okay,
are not
cunning.
necessarily evil. Some of
Right.
the greatest wizards have come from Slytherin.
Okay.
Hufflepuff. Yep.
Anyways,
that makes
yes,
sense to me.
Hufflepuff.
Yeah.
I'm also like, not that I don't like books and stuff, but I'm not super like, I don't know, what is Ravenclaw known for? Its smarts.
Yeah.
I'm not
we are.
a nerd.
Yes, they are.
Yeah. Okay.
Also, checks out.
Yeah. So I am a Ravenclaw.
So yeah.
I took the test a while ago, like maybe 10 years ago, and they put me in Slytherin. But I think that's because I overemphasized my general introvertedness. And so that turned into being like brooding and conniving, which I never was. I think I just wanted to be cool. But I think it is more accurate to put me in Ravenclaw. So.
Yeah.
Anyway, yeah.
Yeah.
So that's the houses we would be in. And we discussed all that while sipping on this tasty new drink that Heidi is definitely going to enjoy more in the future. So thanks for joining us on the Mortal Spirits segment. So, topic 2.
like to.
At the time of recording, it is not almost Valentine's Day. By the time that you, the Embers, are listening to this, it will in fact be almost Valentine's Day.
Yes.
And so we thought it would be interesting to talk about Valentine's Day a little bit, keep it relatively lighthearted with the main theme question of, should Valentine's Day exist? Ooh. Yeah. And some people are going to hear that and be like, of course it should exist. I expect to be receiving lots of delicious and beautiful gifts from my boyfriend. And some of you listening are like, oh crap, I forgot that it's almost Valentine's Day. So this is your reminder that it's almost Valentine's Day. That would be me.
Go buy your overpriced roses now.
Yeah.
Right.
Before they become more overpriced.
Or give you a 2-day warning. That's pretty good.
Yeah.
That's pretty good.
That's pretty solid. So you're welcome for the reminder. This is actually also a reminder to future Dylan, because Dylan is going to be uploading this episode shortly before Valentine's Day. He's going to be like, right, Valentine's Day episode, have to do something for Valentine's Day.
Or do you have to?
Or do you have to? Because if it shouldn't exist, maybe we're just going to skip it this year. Who knows? So I thought we could discuss this a little bit. It's kind of a fun thing to disagree on potentially.
Disclaimer though, do not just independently decide you're not doing Valentine's Day. Please talk to your significant other and send them this episode. Share it with those that you love and decide together.
Yeah.
Yes. Assuming that our conclusion is in fact that Valentine's Day shouldn't exist, which I don't know that that's where we're going to end up, but we'll see.
Okay. But if you conclude by listening to us that it shouldn't exist, don't decide that it shouldn't exist for your significant other.
Right. Yes. This should be a conversation. Communication is the most important thing in any relationship. It's going to be fine. Maybe we just broke up some members, but it's fine. You'll find somebody else. They're not the one.
Listen to episode 2.
Episode 2.
Okay.
All right. So to give us some background framing and context about Valentine's Day, though, I thought it would be interesting if we could discuss a little bit of the history of Valentine's Day, right? Yes. Where did this holiday even come from that we are all so obsessive about celebrating? And I unilaterally decided today that Jill was going to be our podcast historian. So she's going to give us a bit of the history on Valentine's Day. So take it away, Jill.
Let's go, Jill.
Okay. Yeah, I've got some history on Valentine's Day. So there's kind of this legend of Valentine's Day. Now, Valentine, Saint Valentine, actually comes from different potential saints, not just one.
Interesting.
So there's Saint Valentine and there's Saint Valentinus. And then there was another Valentine of Terni, I believe, Terni. He was a bishop, so not a saint at naming. Anyway, so originally we have the kind of Catholic Church and ancient Rome tradition. So around the 3rd century, we have Emperor Claudius II, and he outlawed marriage because he believed that single men make better soldiers. They don't have families and things to worry about and people to go back to.
Interesting.
So then there was a priest named Valentine at the time, and the legend goes that he was defying the emperor and secretly marrying young men and women that were falling in love. He was then put to death, which makes him a martyr, turns him into a saint, and now we have a Roman culture that celebrates Saint Valentine. Okay, that's one. And then you have Valentine of Terni, also beheaded, but the legend behind that one is that he was actually helping Christians escape Rome prisons.
Oh, okay.
So the legend behind him is he was then put in jail, and during the time he was in jail, he fell in love with the jailer's daughter. Ooh. Now there is some mixed opinion on if the jailer's daughter was blind or not. Anyway, he was in prison, fell in love with the jailer's daughter, and wrote what they say were the first Valentines. Because they were notes, love letters from Valentine himself to his person he was in love with outside of jail. And legend has it, he actually signed it from your Valentine. Literally his name. He was just signing his name.
As one does.
As one might do on their
love
letter.
letters to your blind girlfriend in jail.
Can you imagine if Dylan wrote letters to Jill? Love your Dylan. And all of a sudden we had a whole holiday holiday called like Dylan's Day or something.
King. Yes. Saint Valentine, king status.
It's pretty much what
Yeah.
happened. And so then he was in prison and later on also beheaded because he was helping Christians escape Rome prisons, etc. And so then years later, we have Valentine, and that's where we get the "from your Valentine" phrasing.
And presumably there's a bit of, we were talking about myth and fantasy, right?
Right.
Yeah.
The myth of Valentine. There was maybe some editorial work done after the fact to make for a good story. So
Potentially.
Right.
Yes.
now that history sounds pretty benign, and I think that lines up with what I've heard. But in some of my research on some of the complaints, the history, there was some quote unquote problematic history associated with that. Did you hear anything about that? Is there more to the history?
Are you referring to the Lupercalia festivals?
That word
Or
sounds familiar. So
Festival of Lupercalia. I did read about the Festival of Lupercalia, also known as a fertility festival celebrating the god of agriculture, Faunus. So this festival was usually also in Rome on February 15. It also sometimes spanned multiple days, so anywhere between like the 13th and the 15th. It comes from the legend of Romulus and Remus, the founders of Rome, being abandoned as children, and they were raised by a she-wolf, which is also known as a lupa. So they had this celebration in Rome, and it was essentially actually more so for like representing like fertility, pretty much. So there was a goat sacrifice, and that is kind of where you get the red of Valentines from the red blood, kind of representing the fertility side of things. And then they like drew the blood on you and then took goat milk and cleaned it off, which the white is kind of representing like new life and procreation. And so they would wipe the red blood off with the white milk, colors of Valentines. Anyway, but also just blood and milk.
Death and life. Okay.
Yes, okay. And then they would take goat skins. They would cut them into thongs, essentially, from this sacrificed goat, the men.
like underwear.
Correct. Thong underwear. So the thing was, or the legend goes, it was usually very scantily clad and sometimes not clothed men running around with
They did that a lot.
So they're running around with these goatskin thongs, and they would fling it at the crops and then also women. But the weirdest part of the whole story is that women like would line up for this to happen to them.
They want the goat skins flung at them by the nude men?
Yes, because it was a celebration of agriculture and fertility. They wanted to ward away evil spirits and infertility. So the women would line up for this to happen because the men were spreading fertility to both the crops and to females. Because they want to have children and they also want to have a good crop next year. And we're talking about February, right? Right before spring.
Yeah.
It's mating season.
Correct. And so, and then the last part of that was some women would enter their names into the random jar of names. And men would
The sorting hat, you would
the
say?
sorting hat. And men would pick a name out of it.
No, that's more like the Goblet of Fire.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah,
Yeah,
it was
Goblet of Fire, right.
So they'd pick a name out of it. And that man would then, for the festival, get to be with this woman. Oddly enough, though, some people would carry it out for the whole year until they got put back into the
Like
jar.
The Bachelor.
Oh.
Or a lot of them ended up just getting married.
Because they liked each other?
Because they liked each other enough.
Wait, this is how I want to do it now. All the Christians, put your names in a bucket.
Just put your names in a bucket. Now you're stuck with them.
I'm kidding. I don't actually want to do that, Dylan.
So,
A
anyway.
number of reasons that might not be a good idea.
Terrible.
So Lupercalia is not so much the legend. Like, there was this pagan celebration. The details are a little hazy on if it was a goat or a dog or if there were really goatskin thongs being flung at people or random couplings. So that's all a little weird. But yes, around the time of 270, when this celebration had been going on for years and was quite exciting, I guess, the Christians wanted to replace that celebration with something. They didn't want to celebrate Lupercalia
Right.
or the fertility festival of Faunus, the god of agriculture, right? They were not into that.
Good call.
So they were trying to take it back, which is very similar to a lot of holidays we have,
Christmas,
right?
Yeah.
Christmas.
All Hallows Day. I
Yeah.
think is one like that.
So they were
All
trying
Saints Day.
to,
All Saints Day.
yeah, All Saints Day. They were trying to claim not claim it because they didn't have a holiday to start with then, but they were trying to claim the day back, essentially. And so they then brought on Valentines. And because Valentine's is in some sense rooted in, well, more promiscuous coupling and love,
Such things, yes.
Right.
then they were like, well, why don't we put this in the bounds of like a married couple that, you know,
nice things.
can represent that romance in a positive light.
Interesting.
And realistically, it took until like the Middle Ages, France and England finally kind of decided we're going to make it February 14 because they actually kind of took on the whole like spring is coming, and that was the birds mating season. So they were like, oh, we will use our day then. And in America, it wasn't until maybe around 1700 when Valentine's kind of became a thing, and it wasn't until 1840 when the first like mass-produced Valentine cards were ever like created and started being passed out. But it was whether the legends of Valentine, the priest or bishop or Saint Valentine giving notes to his blind jailer's daughter were true or not, they used that legend and also the actual celebration on Lupercalia to then claim it back as a Christian or a more pure romantic holiday.
That's amazing.
That's pretty wild.
That one's good.
So, a little bit of the history there. That's cool. What about our personal experiences with Valentine's Day? So, we've grown up in a culture where it's basically mandatory to engage in even like as kids. So, I was homeschooled, right? So, no, I did not give Valentines to myself because that would be weird. We would do things with homeschool co-ops where we would make Valentines and give them to all of our friends.
My dad would always get, we are a house full of women. So my dad was outnumbered, 3 daughters and his wife, of course. And he would always, I think mom probably was the leader on the whole card thing, but there was always a card and some chocolate and some things for each of us at the table on Valentine's Day or that evening if it wasn't a weekend or something for all of us girls.
I, as a family, don't remember our parents doing anything for us as kids. Except for maybe my mom would write us a little Valentine's note and put it in our lunch.
Oh, that's nice.
But she did that every once in a while anyways.
Okay, so it wasn't that special.
I mean, at
It
school,
was nice, but yeah.
at school, not always. When we were younger, I think probably through maybe elementary school, everybody decorated one day a box, and then it was always the kid who brought the fun dip. They had the best Valentine. Because because you could get cards, and some kids gave cards, just the fold in half ones that I always picked Scooby-Doo, almost always, and they said silly things like, Scooby-Doo loves you. Like, I don't even remember.
They're so fun.
But that was it, right? And you signed them, and then I just remember as I got older, it got less cool to be the person that left the cards. You had to give candy.
Right.
Like, everyone was just ripping them open for candy. But you got 15 or 20. However many kids were in your class, you just put one in everyone's box.
Yeah. So we didn't do anything from parents to kids, but definitely for sure the middle school experience. And obviously, like, if there's a boy that you have a crush on, then you're writing little love notes, right? And so it's like whatever to everybody else, but then like I would stare at this one and be like, oh, do I give this to him? Like, how many little heart candy should I give to this?
Oh, yeah, the little Be Mine hearts.
The Be Mine hearts.
And then you had to decide which heart to give him.
Right. Because is like Be Mine too much? I don't even know what else
don't
do they
even
say.
And then one of them said, "Kiss me," and like that's
I think
just
one said, "I heart you" or something. I love
bridge
you.
too far.
Yeah. Anyway,
Yeah.
So that was
kind of
as
mandatory.
kids.
I guess.
Yeah. And like every parent takes their kid out, or many parents, I'm sure, took their kids out to like buy these Valentine like packages. And
Yeah.
then they were, oh yeah, I should probably get something for my spouse.
This is all like kid memory stuff.
Yeah.
What about as adults, like college age and beyond? Did Valentine's change for you, or I don't know? What were your experiences?
When you're in a relationship, it's fun.
Okay.
When you're
Or was
single,
it?
it's just kind of like, okay.
But even in a relationship, was it fun, or was it just like so hyped up that you thought that it was like a really big deal? And so then when it always never met your expectations, it just sucked.
Yeah, and we're gonna get into this whole expectations versus reality thing. But if you and your significant other are like on the same page and you do a little fun thing for Valentine's Day, I don't think it's bad, and it can be a fun thing.
Sure.
But I spent so many years single, and so definitely did fall into this whole idea of like Galentine's Day. My single friends and I would go out for dinner
Okay.
and like celebrate our friendship instead of a romantic
Sure.
love, which is fine.
Yeah. I don't know there's anything wrong with that.
There's nothing really wrong with it. I think it's usually the day before Valentine's Day, though. Like
You mean
Galentine's Day.
Single Awareness Day.
Oh my god, that can go. Galentine's Day is fun. Bro-Valentine's Day or whatever.
not a
Valentine's
thing.
Day.
The dude's version of that.
Yeah, it's
That-
called Palentine's Day.
No.
That's
No, it's
Pals.
not.
not okay.
Nobody has ever done that. And excuse me for saying so, but that's kind of gay.
It's really gay. Valentine's.
Yeah. No.
Wait,
not a thing.
do dudes refer to themselves as like pals?
No.
Okay,
I don't
good.
think so.
I never heard that.
Nope. Not a thing.
Oh, good. I shouldn't start either. But yeah, so that was my experience is like being single on Valentine's Day. And honestly, it was just kind of a reminder that you're not in a relationship, which kind of stinks and is unfortunate, especially if that's something that you desire. But at the same time, I don't think it's bad for us to have like a day of love that we sort of celebrate that and that you're more intentional in your relationship. I think that that's fine. A lot of single people get really triggered by it. And that's where I think there's actually more of an issue with the single person than the holiday itself.
Sure.
You as a single person need to be aware that there are people in relationships and that's something that you want, but it's okay.
So it's a redefinition of Singles Awareness Day. It's that they need to start being a little bit more aware of themselves and not so annoying.
Exactly. Yes. Being aware of your emotions.
Says Heidi, who is in a relationship and not single. So
Right. But
she has been
for the
single,
cred,
yes.
I had like 10 years.
Up until this Valentine's Day.
Right. But, sometimes I would just go on a random date on Valentine's Day too,
Yeah.
which was also kind of fun.
Yeah.
If your relationship starts off on Valentine's Day, like,
How
I
romantic.
think that has also been coined Desperation Day before.
oh, for sure, it's very desperate. But, like, going on a little date doesn't hurt. You could probably get a good deal.
Can I backtrack just a second?
Yeah.
Sorry.
I wanted to comment a couple of things for our current, what do Dylan and Jill do for Valentine's Day? Because we're married.
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
So from the perspective of a married couple, Valentine's Day, probably there's some people that there's super high expectations still, but also there's a good chance that you've been let down by the time you get married. And so maybe it's lost a little bit of the shine for you.
Mm.
So for us, I don't know if I would say that we find it fun to kind of have like a tradition that we stick to and then variations on the theme just to kind of have something
AKA,
consistent.
even since the first Valentine's Day that we had together, he's gotten off easy. Not really.
It's true.
We
Jill
don't.
doesn't have high expectations for me on that, so I've lucked out. But one of the things that we do consistently is we'll get Chinese takeout. That's just a thing that we do.
Yep.
We started it, and then we kept doing it year after year.
That's
So
amazing.
That's a tradition. The other thing that I started doing, and I have since stopped, was I would get Jill some sort of stuffed animal. This is a pro tip. If you decide to do a tradition, know that the tradition is going to have some expectation of growing every year.
Oh.
Don't go too big too early because it's unsustainable. So I thought, I'm going to get Jill a stuffed panda bear for Valentine's Day every year. I made it 2 years. because the
Two.
second one was so big that I would have had to like import the panda bear in order to successfully keep up the
only way to
escalation of
sustain
size.
it would be to start adopting real panda bears.
I mean, at this point, yes. So
Which are much smaller.
the pro
than
tip
the thing that you
is don't go all out too soon. If you do want a tradition that can grow
Okay.
every year, have realistic expectations.
Start with a keychain panda bear.
It's a good choice.
let it grow.
Learn from my mistakes.
30 years. It's just this huge thing.
Exactly.
It would have
You
been
see how
fine
this is a
then.
problem.
But instead, he says he started this tradition.
I mean,
It ended.
It ended because I made the mistake.
1 year
of
later.
Is
too
it a
big, too
requirement that
fast.
it grows each year?
I think that leads into a little bit of some of what people think about Valentine's Day and some of the complaints that people have about them. So this idea of escalation is certainly a component. Once you're married, there's a little bit of an expectation that, yeah, it's going to be some sort of like status quo. Unless, I mean, there's some really romantic dudes out there that I'm sure just crush Valentine's Day every year.
Good for
There's
them.
also dudes that
Yeah.
don't. And that's okay, right? Your wife married you. She's the one. You're good. That's not an excuse. That's not an excuse to not. Anyway.
And
Thank you.
Yeah.
Huh?
He said it. It's just not an excuse to
It's
not
not
do
an excuse.
anything.
Yeah.
Okay, so there's this aspect though that's clearly being communicated that there is an expectation.
I think
Yes.
Heidi.
Right,
I
this
think
is-
Heidi has some different expectations.
Yeah. So
Yes.
and some of those can become unrealistic. There's also this idea that if you don't at least meet or exceed what you did last year, then you're regressing, and that reflects badly on your relationship. So that's a complaint that some people have, is that Valentine's Day builds up unrealistic expectations on dudes to be able to plan and execute literally the perfect date and be extravagant in all the right ways and be at least as good, if not better, than last year.
Status quo or better. I mean, like,
Yeah.
So this goes to communication. We can get into this maybe in a different episode. But, like, there's pressure on men, I think, oftentimes because women do not express their expectations. And so, like, I've had it before where I'm like, I just want to go out to regular dinner. And then they're out here, like, pulling all the stops. And I'm like, I kind of am, like, tired and kind of just want to, like, go to dinner. And that is equally as sad if, like, the woman isn't all for it and then the dude, goes crazy. And it's like, okay, I gotta get ready for this, So, and the opposite is also true when, like, the woman is expecting all these things and he doesn't do it. So women, communicate your expectations clearly. That does not unromanticize the moment, I don't think.
I agree. I would very much say that most dudes would love some clear direction.
Yes.
The more clear you can be, the better.
Because it's like if you grew up where your dad got your mom flowers every single Valentine's Day, and then all of a sudden you don't get Valentine's Day flowers, it's like, that's rude. Even though he takes you out to dinner and he gets you chocolate, where's the flowers?
Mm-hmm.
So if you would just say, my dad gave my mom flowers every year, and that's something that I really enjoy. Boom, he can go and do it.
And on the flip side, if you're a dude, pay attention when she says that. Don't just be like, flowers, and then carry on with your life. Write it down. Put it on your calendar. You will forget.
Reminder.
I have forgotten.
Did you really forget a Valentine's Day?
Have I don't know that I've... Okay. Well, no, not from Jill's knowledge, but there's definitely been 7 a.m. at Pick and Save grabbing some flowers because I'm like, oh, it's Valentine's Day.
I mean, yeah.
And
So,
also, I'm sure there's been a year where all we've done is gone to takeout.
yeah.
Yeah.
Because it also involves, like you said, knowing the person that you're with.
Right.
Jill doesn't mind flowers. She also isn't like,
I need flowers.
yeah, she doesn't
Right.
just
They're nice.
melt over flowers. So,
Yeah.
Which kind of gets to the whole point of, like, is Valentine's Day necessary?
Right.
Because, like, if your significant other says, flowers are nice, but I don't really need them, is it worth $30, $40, whatever these dudes are spending on flowers to, like, just get her flowers that
60
are
if
going to
you're doing a-
die?
Like 60 if you're doing a dozen red roses kind of
Right.
thing.
So it can get expensive and sort of unnecessary just to keep up with the status quo. But that's why I really am a big proponent of It's nice when men can read your mind, but they aren't mind readers.
No, we are not. And it's really nice when a woman knows that you're not a mind reader and just says, hey, I'm going to communicate clearly with you because I know you're not a mind reader.
I feel like Jill does.
Yeah, Jill's pretty clear.
Sometimes.
Yeah.
I think you're touching on a point, another complaint that people have about Valentine's Day is that it's very expensive.
Yeah.
And, you know, if there's this level of expectation of, I need these very expensive flowers and candy and jewelry and all that, and some guy is like, boy, I can't afford that.
Yeah.
Then there's this kind of pay to play aspect that's not what we would consider conducive to a healthy Christian romantic relationship budding towards something of potential long-term marriage.
Right.
So I have a few other complaints that I noted that were common among people who like to complain about Valentine's Day. I also read all these through the lens of this is probably a sad single person sitting on their couch with a box of wine crying into their notebook on Valentine's Day as they write this article. So just have that in the back of your mind. One big complaint I think I've heard about this is that, Valentine's Day is just a Hallmark holiday. That's this corporate thing that's designed to get you to spend all the money on the dumb things that nobody actually wants or cares about, and the overpriced cards and the overpriced flowers and the overpriced this and that, just because Hallmark wants to make money.
Yes.
Maybe.
Could be.
Possibly. That's, I think, a lot of things, though. Any holiday is going to be corporatized because people learn that they can make money on it. One that I thought was actually kind of interesting is that, and this is newish in the age of social media, is that it encourages comparison and dissatisfaction. So when you're scrolling through your feed or seeing what everyone else is, if your significant other didn't give you the same Valentine's Day that you see somebody else getting, that can make you dissatisfied. Even if they did the best of their ability and were very thoughtful, if it's, but they could have done that other person had, that can put you in a place to not appreciate them for what they did do.
Right.
And so I can see that being a challenge. Is that a strike against Valentine's Day itself? Not really. I think that's more a manage your own personal expectations.
I think I've said it before. Maybe I haven't said it on the podcast before, but comparison.
Comparison is the thief of joy. You did say that.
Joy.
Yeah. How about you guys? Have you heard of any other complaints associated with Valentine's Day?
Mostly just that it makes single people sad. Like, that's the only real complaint I've ever heard about it, is that it makes single people feel inadequate. But the reality is that we have Mother's Day, and some people that have mothers, everyone has a mom, but their mom might have either died or not be a part of their life, and we are still okay with, like, celebrating moms. And we have Father's Day, and the same applies. And so I don't think it's a bad thing for spouses and people in relationships to have a special day that they celebrate each other. And it doesn't say anything about the person who doesn't have a mom alive or in their life. And it doesn't say anything about the single person. With that being said, I think that every day should be Valentine's Day in the sense that if you use Valentine's Day as an excuse for it to be the one day a year that you show extra love to your spouse, that is sad. And spouses should be showing love to each other in many ways throughout the year. And then there's just a little, cherry on top on Valentine's Day. And so the flowers are great. All of that is wonderful. But if that's the only time that you can expect flowers, then you might want to have a deeper conversation about that.
Provided you have the expectation of wanting flowers.
Right. Flowers as an example.
Yeah. A lot of the other complaints about Valentine's Day actually come from a lot of the lefties in the world. So it's not inclusive of LGBT, or Valentine's Day reinforces the patriarchy, or it's bad for the environment because flowers and agrochemicals and stuff. And reading all that just made me want to celebrate Valentine's Day even harder. But that's not...
We better step up our game because we're just getting taken.
Yeah, no.
Dylan's about to get
I'm going to buy an entire field of highly chemicalized flowers.
Okay, but the chemicals are not good. Not a reason not to celebrate Valentine's Day. I'm just saying the pesticides could,
Okay. Oh, I'm not eating the flowers, so.
I know, but they're still not good for, like, the water.
Oh, okay.
Wow, I sound... Okay, I'm just saying, like...
I'll cut it
have
out.
a little bit of a point.
Okay.
You could keep that in. I'm fine with that.
Okay. Anyway, makes me want to celebrate it even harder. But that's not a good reason to celebrate a holiday just because it makes somebody else mad.
Right.
So if I'm going to continue to engage in Valentine's Day going forward, I want it to be for the right reasons. Mm-hmm. What Heidi said was correct in that you shouldn't need a calendar holiday to engage with and show your affection and love for the person that you've committed your life to, particularly in a marriage relationship. Mm-hmm. But like you also said, that could be applied to birthdays or Mother's and Father's Day, right? We love our friends. You celebrate them every day, but we celebrate people especially on their birthday. We love our moms and dads, but we celebrate them especially on Mother's and Father's Day. And so I think that's not a reason not to celebrate Valentine's Day. So my conclusion would be that it's fine and good as long as you keep it in the proper perspective. This shouldn't be your only source of love. You shouldn't have unrealistic expectations that if broken, then that's the end of your relationship. Mm-hmm. But use it to bring yourself towards a picture of love, which is a godly trait, right? God is love, and we want to express that to those who are closest to us. So.
Yeah, I agree with you completely. Honestly, when we first said we're going to talk about Valentine's Day, I love love, okay?
Yes, I think we're aware.
We know, okay? Yes, so I love love,
True.
And I was excited to talk about this topic because initially when we brought up Valentine's Day, I do think it's a very silly holiday, if I'm being completely honest. Okay. I think that it does set those high expectations and that oftentimes it comes with more disappointment than excitement.
Sure.
For a lot of people. And just in singleness, it was sad. It's dark and cold where we live. And all of a sudden, it's February 14th, and you're reminded again that you aren't in a relationship. So while I initially came in with sort of a negative, honestly, mindset of Valentine's Day, I was like, I love love, but I don't think that we need a special day. You should be able to celebrate your relationship 365 days a year. Then I looked at the Bible, and it turns out there's an entire book of the Bible called Song of Solomon or Song of Songs, and it's literally about a husband and a wife enjoying each other and loving each other, and that just shows like how significant romantic love is to the Lord and how much he values that. And so I think setting aside a special day to acknowledge it and put the special worth there and putting in the extra investment of money and time and energy and thought is actually really healthy in marriage. So Valentine's Day is a tough one for a lot of people. I get it. I feel you. I understand. But go have a cocktail or a mocktail with your friends and it's okay. It says your reaction to it says, I think, more about you than the holiday itself.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think to add on to that, Heidi, I think it was you in our very first episode, even as we talked about just the dichotomy of men and women. And you made the point going back not just to Song of Solomon or Song of Songs, but in Genesis, God created man and he said it was not good for man to be alone. Mm-hmm. And so then he created woman. And so having a celebration or an extra special day for that is something that it's kind of fun.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, like Dylan said, we have our traditions and we just kind of have fun with it. It's not really that much out of the norm for us because we do make sure that the other 364 days of the year we are doing the things together for each other and with each other so that that love is communicated and it doesn't have to be relied on one day. But it's fun to have that one day to say, oh, this is what we do this day.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And doing it that day is important and it's good. And there are many ways that we can show love, not only to our significant others, but if you are single, like, love is still good. And we can define love. I think that's one awesome thing about 1 Corinthians 13, verse 4. Love is patient, and love is kind, and love does not envy or boast, and it is not arrogant or rude. It does not insist on its own way. It is not irritable or resentful. It does not rejoice at wrongdoing, but rejoices in the truth. Love bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. And sometimes when we're in relationships with humans, it can be really hard to love in that way because I can't love perfectly like that, and neither can my boyfriend or my future husband. No one can, but we know the God who is all of those things. So in knowing that, we get to go and show love to everyone. So spread the gospel. If you can't do anything else on Valentine's Day and you know who Jesus is and you know love in its fullest, which is God, then you can certainly spread love by showing the gospel or spreading the gospel on Valentine's Day. What better way to spend your day? That's my Valentine's
Thanks,
Day
Heidi.
take.
Yeah. Well,
Cool.
Those were some really great discussions. I really enjoyed tasting the mead, and I loved that Heidi loved it so much. Sorry, Jill. Eventually, we will find a drink that you like.
Yes.
Maybe. We'll probably have whiskey next time, so you probably won't like that. But we'll find something eventually. And thank you, Embers, for joining us. We hope that you've had a little bit of fun with us in these conversations. It's been a little bit of a lighter episode, which we need every once in a while, some of these fun topics. So thanks for joining us and stoking the conversation.
Yeah, continue to engage with us on all of the channels, and please leave a 5-star review. Leave us a comment. Tell us if you have some topics you want to hear more about or new topics that we haven't talked about. We'd love to hear from you.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, comment, and subscribe. And
Engage with us on social media.
Yes.
So since last episode, I think some of us have been trying to get more active on X. Come argue with me on X. I would have lots of fun. I think Jill and Heidi will be there too. But
I'll
anyway,
definitely be scrolling, watching the arguments go down.
Yeah.
And for sure, we have an Instagram, we have an X, we have obviously YouTube. So if you want video and you're currently on a podcast platform, go and check us out on YouTube. Like, comment, and subscribe, and burn bright, Embers.